thank you very much. Really good to be here. I'm so sorry I wasn't here yesterday. It sounded like it was a really interesting day. Although, a caveat, I do apologise if anything I say now was said yesterday, so I do apologise about that. But yeah, my name is Dunn. I'm a senior lecturer in the School of Natural Sciences at Bangor University, and my area of research is wetlands. So basically I tell people I spend most of my time, well as much time as I possibly can, looking at mud. That's what I do. So I look at carbon sequestration, so restoring peatlands and managing peatlands, and other mangroves as well, for storing carbon. But the other side of my research is treatment wetlands as well. So I look at how we can build, construct, make wetlands of all sorts of different types to treat a whole range of different pollutants, from pharmaceutical waste, illicit drug waste, to sewage, the whole range, and even microplastics as well. So that's my day job, but I'm also the Associate Pro-Vice Chancellor, brackets sustainability. I think you've always made it in life when you have a job title with brackets, to be perfectly honest. But my job is to make sure that Bangor University is as sustainable as it can possibly be. For those of you who don't know where Bangor is, well, I'm sure you all know where Bangor is, but it's literally just down the road, about half an hour away, and if you've not been, it's lovely, you should go. And if you go now, you'll see lots of happy graduates wandering around as well, so it's a lovely time to go and visit. We're at this wonderful kind of mix of literally old school, Hogwarts-esque buildings, old libraries and all that kind of stuff. It's lovely. And then obviously, you know, we're a modern university, so we have all the modern facilities, all the modern shiny labs and new shiny equipment. But we also have some brilliant kind of additional teaching, but also research facilities as well, which makes us stand out from most of the universities in the UK. So for example, we have the UK's only research-owned sea-going and ocean-going research vessel, the Prince Maddock. We have our own research farm as well, which is really good because it owns land that goes right from the coast, the North Wales coast, right up into the foothills of Snowdonia. So all the habitats in between. And we're doing a lot of work there to look at how we can kind of manage land differently with changing kind of agricultural policies and kind of changing the way that we use our land, not just for food production. We also have our own natural history museum and our own botanic gardens and a whole range of additional stuff as well to make us really stand out as a research-led university. But our sustainability is absolutely crucial. Everything that we do at Bangor University is all gearing up around sustainability. Our curriculum, our teaching, our research, it's all based around sustainability. We have kind of a policy, and arguably the most important part of that policy is something that I've been seeing that you've been talking about, or are talking about these past 2 days. And that is, when you talk about sustainability, everybody instantly thinks about the environment, natural resources. And in fact, if you do as you're doing these sorts of presentations, you do a Google Scholar search. Not that you ever steal pictures from Google at all, but you always do a Google Scholar search. If you put in sustainability, you always get pictures. The whole picture is always about trees and green, and it's all very, very environmental. But as I'm sure everybody here is aware, the environment is not the only thing about sustainability. Sustainability is so much more than that. We always say in Bangor University we've been around for about 180 years, and we wish to be going for at least another 180 years. So we need to manage all our resources, not just our natural resources, but our cultural, our social, and our economic as well. So that's crucial for Bangor University when we start talking about sustainability. It's not just the environment. And then obviously we have researchers who are on government panels, on government boards. We write papers, we're doing research all the time about all things to do with sustainability. And so we're using all that expertise in-house as well to make us as sustainable as we possibly can be. Open and honest communication, I'm sure you've been talking about this as well these past 2 days, and that is, we never want to be accused of greenwashing. So easy to kind of put out a press release, do an action which sounds really good for the public, but really, you're not really doing anything, you're just pushing the problem somewhere else. That's absolutely crucial. We will never do that at Bangor University. And then obviously, I always say that the idea of my role is to make my role redundant in the next 5 years, which I'm sure will please my bosses immensely. That's because we want to make sure in a few years' time that sustainability, we don't have to talk about it. We don't have to have conferences about it in our university. We don't have to be, doing training programs at our university for our staff about it, because it's just part of everything that we do. From our purchasing, to our investments, to our research and teaching, and everything that we do. It's just all sustainability is built into absolutely everything. When it comes to our university, most of the sustainability work is done in these two schools. School of Natural Sciences, which is where I'm from, and it's the biggest school in the university now, and the School of Ocean Sciences, so that should be SOS. Hopefully no one from the ocean sciences ever sees this because they were very protective. However, as I've just said, sustainability is not just about the environment and natural sciences. So we do research, multidisciplinary research across our university. I've just been doing some research on microplastics and littering with a film studies professor. I didn't even know they existed, but there are film studies professors, and we are doing research with them on the issue, because sustainability is so much more than the natural sciences. We're good at it as well at Bangor University. So there's this thing called REF, Research Excellence Framework, and it's every 7 years, and it's how the government judges how good you are at research in your university. And we came first in the UK for the impact of our research in earth systems and environmental sciences. So the research that we are doing at Bangor University has having the most impact on society of any other university. Forget Oxford, Cambridge, the lot, Bangor University. For example, COVID measuring in sewage was done at Bangor University throughout the pandemic and continues to be done so as well. It's affecting the government policy all the time. Lots of research like that being done at Bangor University. But let's look about Bangor. Back to things to talk about now. And when I was asked to give a presentation, I said, well, yeah, sure, I can give a presentation on sustainability. So I brought a topic, I can do it. So what do you really want me to talk about? So they said, can you please tell us, how can outdoor recreation not be detrimental to conservation? And so I said, okay, but this question doesn't really make sense to me, because I see outdoor recreation as in no way detrimental to conservation. In fact, I see it completely the opposite. I see outdoor recreation being utterly essential part of the conservation of our landscape and our environment, an absolutely essential part. So I try to change the question around a little bit, and so I've just decided to give you 3 examples or suggestions about the great work that is already being done, but also how we can kind of perhaps tweak it with kind of an academic head on. And I must stress that I am an academic. I sit in my ivory tower and I can talk about and I do research. I'm not a practitioner at all. So you guys know that world far, far better than I will ever know that. But the first thing that is absolutely essential that outdoor recreation provides, that is essential for conservation, is education and inspiration. Obviously, you guys, or people organising outdoor recreation, inspire the next generation. And I'm not going to go into town about this because this is very clear, we're all aware of it, and there's lots of anecdotal evidence when it comes to things like COVID and the pandemic and lockdown. We all needed to get out more and our well-being suffered. So as a scientist, obviously went and did some research about this, and there are papers about this. Papers dating back actually from about the 1980s looking at this, to show that this, for example, is that, say, children who are given an experience of the outdoor world grow up to be more interested in the environment and in conservation and doing something about things like climate change. So it's very clear, there is scientific evidence about how important it is getting kids out, and grown-ups, but getting kids out into the outdoors and getting them to enjoy the outdoors. So the second one I want to start talking about properly, citizen science. Getting outdoors, recreation, fantastic. But maybe sometimes what we can do is involve a little bit of citizen science in that. And the UK has a fantastic history of citizen science. Citizen science is literally just collecting data but not using professional scientists to do that. So, gosh, that looks a little bit First World War-esque. I do apologise, it's not supposed to be very First World War. But this is an example of a real kind of classic example of citizen science. This was Robert Marshall, who was a rector from Norfolk, and he started recording the timings of things like birds appearing, flowering, phenology. So the timing of things, and it's adjusted, and it's all about climate change. And we've got data going back hundreds of years because of scientists, citizen scientists, hundreds of years ago, starting to collect data. We've actually got data that goes back hundreds of years, nearly thousands of years, when it comes to the Japanese blossoming as well. So the cherry trees that blossom in Japan, we've got data going back hundreds, close to 1,000 years for that as well. So we have a history in the UK though for collecting data, citizen science. For one thing that we are using citizen science for, so these are people who use the outdoors, outdoor swimmers, wild swimmers. We've got them with an organisation called We Swim Wild to collect data for us. They're going out and they're collecting water samples for us, and then they're coming back to Bangor University and we're analysing them for microplastics. So we've been running this. This is the UK's biggest, probably the world's biggest look microplastics in inland waters. And we got citizen scientists collect it in wine bottles, which obviously the press thought was hilarious at the time. So we've got samples from every county in the UK, and this was people who enjoy using the outdoors. Outdoor swimmers. We just got them to do something while they were enjoying their usual activity. And then there is this, Seek. Please tell me everybody here has Seek on their phones. Does everybody have Seek? Who doesn't have Seek? Oh my goodness me. So my gift to you, forget whatever I'm going to say, the rest is not important. My gift to you now is to download Seek onto your, don't do it now if I'm still talking, but in a few minutes, download Seek onto your phones. It will change your life. It will also mean you can never go for a quick walk again, because it's it is a bit like demon magic, I have to confess. You have your phone and you point it at anything, like a plant, an animal if it stays still enough, but plants in particular, and it will then identify what it is. It's amazing. It's got about like 80% kind of accuracy. I'm not going to lie, it's not perfect every time, but it identifies what it is. And then if you link it up with this organisation called iNaturalist, because the two are linked, you can then create research-worthy data. And so this is taken from Google Scholar. These are peer-reviewed published papers, and you can see that massive spike of papers published referencing iNaturalist. It is research quality data produced by everyone. Anyone can go out there and start seeking, linking it to iNaturalist. Outdoor recreationists, anyone that's involved in the outdoor world should be interested in this, should be getting this, and wherever they go, they should be using it. Whenever I go to a national park or wherever I go, I should be seeing signs. Download Seek, get out there, so you identify as much as you possibly can. Absolutely essential, and use so much for scientific research. So that's my gift to you. It will change your life if you start using Seek, I promise you. So there we go, that was the second one. The third one is where a lot more of my research gets involved in, and that is pioneering land management. So we all know that things like the Common Agricultural Policy are changing, and that's a devolved issue, so they're changing in different parts of the United Kingdom. But we all know that things are changing, and we are going to be looking at different ways of managing our land. And if you're involved with an area of land, you're managing an area of land, you have an opportunity, potentially, to do something different, to do something which could really have an effect, for lots of different reasons. And so I always kind of, when I was talking to my students about this, or kind of at the conferences about this, I always kind of make this point. First of all, the climate is changing, and that should actually not be taken for granted, okay? Because, you know, we all, when I'm talking to people, I'm sure we all understand climate change, but I do quite a little bit of work for the media. One of the organisations I do quite a bit of work for is an organisation called GB News. So I don't know if people know about GB News, but it has a certain perceived viewer and listener. And so I'm one of their go-to nutty scientists to talk about climate change. And so whenever I go on, I start talking about climate change, we should do something about it. And then I will get abuse online. Horrendous amounts of abuse online. They find my email, they give me abuse, telling me I don't know what I'm talking about, and climate change doesn't exist. People out there, a section of society which, you know, my little bubble, I perhaps don't even get involved with that much, but there is a section of society, a large section of society, that still don't agree with that. So I think we should always bear that in mind whenever we're talking about climate change. The best insult I ever got on social media after being on GB News was that if Dr. Christian Dunn is so concerned about climate change, he should eat less food. So there we go. I couldn't really argue with him either. So there we go. Anyway, climate's changing. So if the climate's changing, well the climate is changing, can we continue with current conservation strategies and management practices of natural systems? Or do we need to reconsider what we consider to be a typical species or habitat in the area that we're working on? An example I'll give you for this is blanket bog. So blanket bog is it needs a very specific climate for it to exist. It needs a certain amount of moisture, rainfall, and it also needs a certain amount of temperature, or average temperature, over the year. And when we did some modelling, or some researchers did some modelling on this, they found out that the climatic envelope, which allows blanket bog to exist, is changing because of climate change. And if you start to map it out, then potentially, by the end of this century, the areas where active blanket bog can exist will almost be pretty much just the northwest of Scotland. So, should we, and I'm not saying yes or no, I'm asking the question, should we put a lot of money into current management practices for something like blanket bog if we understand that actually by the end of the century, it cannot be there anymore. It cannot be an active system anymore. What could we do differently? Is there something that we could do differently? And that's just one example. I'm a peatland scientist, so that's the example I'll give you. But when you start looking at, say, salt marshes, you've got a massive change. You've literally got a shift of vegetation. The whole kind of salt marsh structure is changing because of climate change. If you look at mangroves and salt marshes on the tropics, you see mangroves expanding, salt marshes retracting. Climate is changing the actual habitats that can exist in any different location. It's something that we should be aware of if we're then pumping in money and resources into managing an area. It may be essential, it may be not, but it's something to bear in mind. And then we have species changes as well, and migration patterns changing, all sorts of things that we've taken for granted because of our idea of the baseline, but it's changing. And perhaps when our future land management, we have to take that into consideration. And not just the land management to kind of cope with this climate change, what are we going to do about how to manage this area if the climate is changing? We have to be thinking more ambitiously to do that, about that as well. And that's when we come on to nature-based solutions. What can we do if we are managing an area of land? What can we do to make that area of land help us combat climate change or the effects of climate change? Nature-based solutions. Massive buzzword in the world of conservation and the world of kind of environmental strategy at the present time. And it was mentioned and discussed seriously for the first time at COP26. For so long, so many kind of climate scientists have been talking about it. Yes, we need to reduce the amount of emissions that we're pumping out, of course. But also what we need to be doing is looking at how we can manage, change, alter, create different natural habitats to help us combat climate change. And in the UK, this is I would say this because I wrote part of it, but the British Ecological Society wrote a fantastic document about this, about how in the UK we can use nature-based solutions. And then an example I'll give you for this. So this is, and if you're a peatland scientist, this actually makes you cry a little bit, I'm not going to lie. This is in Canada, and this is a peat extraction site. So this is the size of a small city, about Chester, okay? And it is completely bare peat. 10 years ago, this was a peatland. It had sphagnum mosses, it had bilberries, it had cranberries, it had trees growing on it. It was fantastic natural habitat. In 10 years, it has been completely stripped. There will have been 4 metres of peat dug out from there, and that will now be around left to about 40 centimetres of peat. That's all that will be left there. If you go there to see a peatland scientist, it does bring a little bit of a tear to your eye, because that is a horrendous amount of biodiversity lost, but crucially carbon lost as well. So what we do in Bangor University, my research team, we go out there and we restore these areas. We get them to be back to a peat-forming communities. And work is being done in the UK all with similar work. So the Lancashire Wildlife Trust doing tremendous work on this. Lots of peatland restoration work. In the UK, we do have a bit of a different issue, many places as well, such as in the Peat District, where we have this peat erosion complexes. Harder to restore, because this is relatively easy to restore because it's so flat. So I can get my hydrology right, get my water level right, I can then do whatever else I need to do, spread my sphagnum, etc., etc. So it's relatively easy. Expensive, but relatively easy. When I've got kind of these undulating kind of erosion complexes of peat, much more complex. But the peat guys over in the Peat District are doing tremendous work on that. But this is an example of, first of all, we have to manage this land differently. We can't just dig it up and cut it up and burn it or use it for our compost. But we also, by restoring this area, we can then trap more carbon, because an active peatland is the most effective terrestrial store of carbon that we have. Peatlands, Northern Hemisphere peatlands, cover 3% of the Earth's surface, yet they store at least twice the amount of carbon in all the world's forests. They're absolutely essential. But something else that we're doing at Bangor University, and I'm not going to get into the technicalities of this, so don't worry, but basically we have developed a way to change naturally the enzymes that are breaking down organic matter in peatlands. Decomposition. We can stop decomposition in peatlands by using something called the enzymic latch. And it's basically a chemical called phenolics, which is what makes your tea, that tanniny taste, or coffee, dark colour. Those are phenolics. And what we can do, they're naturally produced by plants. We can insert those naturally into peatlands, and it can stop decomposition of peats even more. So we can supercharge those peatlands to store carbon. And so this gives us an interesting question though. It's quite a destructive process adding this phenolics into the peat, but we can then supercharge these peatlands to store more carbon. So it presents us with interesting questions. If we're talking about pioneering land management practices, should we use some of those methods, the enzymic latch, on pristine habitats as well? Thinking about peatlands, we've seen that the model suggests that the areas that active peat can be in the UK is restricted massively. So, should we try to take action about that and affect the pristine peatlands that we have now to store more carbon, to hopefully do something about the climate? So maybe that climatic model will take less time to get as extreme as it is. It's a question we have to ask ourselves if we have the capability to do so and we have the land at our disposal. This is when we get into kind of things like geoengineering. So this is the manipulation, the manipulation by man, us humans, to change the climate. It's what we've already been doing in a way, but in a negative way. Now we've got the capability of doing it, reversing it. Huge controversial issue. Whenever you talk about geoengineering, you always get these pictures of these kind of basically CO2 suckers up from the air, which then store it down in kind of rocks. We've also got kind of rockets blasting off and releasing mirrors into space, all this kind of stuff. It doesn't have to be that extreme. We can use nature as a geoengineering technique. Planting loads of trees, the government's policy to plant loads of trees is theoretically a geoengineering technique. You're sucking in carbon and you're storing it. By removing carbon from the atmosphere, you are changing that concentrations in the atmosphere, you're adjusting the climate potentially. But also, other things that we can use nature-based solutions for, not just that kind of reducing the mass CO2 from the atmosphere, but other benefits as well. Water control, preventing flooding, pioneering land management practices to control flooding. This is an example of a project that we've started over in Chester, grandly called the Chester Wetland Centre. And what we are doing is we are turning a bit of unused parkland into a wet meadow habitat, which is very rare in the UK nowadays, which is one of the reasons curlews are so rare. And what we're doing is changing this whole area to create a wet meadow, which should then retain water to prevent flooding downstream, whilst also providing well-being facilities, getting people out there experiencing kind of a wetland, and also obviously biodiversity. Then we have water quality, changing our landscapes to improve water quality. Sewage pumping into our rivers is obviously a huge issue at the present time. But one of the reasons that's such a problem is because we've destroyed so much of our riparian ecosystems, those buffer zones between the rivers and the land, which act as filters and cleaners for so much pollutants. We've just destroyed them, got rid of them, built on them, or overused them for agriculture. This is an example of that. So a couple of years, last year, we released our study when in 2019, the last time the Glastonbury Festival was on, I sent a bunch of students down to collect water samples in the river that flows through Glastonbury. We took water samples upstream and then we collected water samples downstream while Glastonbury was on, before, during and after, and we found that, shockingly, the amount of cocaine and MDMA or ecstasy flowing downstream during the Glastonbury Festival were excessively high, environmentally damagingly high. How they got there, I have to say, for legal reasons, I have absolutely no idea. It just so happened that the Glastonbury Festival was on. But this highlights a really important issue, not just, which I won't go into because I've already spoken longer, but I won't go into the issue of pharmaceutical waste, this cocktail of drugs that's in our rivers, which no one really wants to talk about, but it's going to be absolutely horrendous when we start finding out about it and affecting our aquatic life, human health, the whole range when we start looking at it. But one of the issues that it's such a problem at a place like Glastonbury is there is no riparian ecosystem. There's none of that buffer zone. So everyone that pees irresponsibly at Glastonbury, it just flows straight into the river. If we had the potential of that riparian buffer zone, some of that would be limited. So, example of using nature to help us with some of the problems that we're facing: climate change, excess population. These are the issues that nature could help us with. Oh, and then the sewage. I did mention sewage, that's fine. And then lastly, and interestingly, I did these slides when I was told to, which is quite impressive for me, a few days ago. So this is an issue here about well-being, and talking about wetlands helping mental well-being and physical well-being as well. But I'm sure people saw the news 2 days ago. WWT, Wildlife and Wildlife Trust, released a new report showing that urban wetlands can massively help people's well-being. So having nature, outdoor recreation close to where people are can hugely benefit them, their physical and their mental well-being as well. Nature-based solutions can cover all that. And then this, finally, is what kind of the questions I often ask my students. And I pick on Snowdonia simply because I lecture at Bangor, and so everyone knows Snowdonia. But I always say to them, so if you're managing an area of land like Snowdonia National Park, it's at your disposal to do something with it. Should we continue with the practices that we're already doing, which are fantastic, I'm not dissing anything, fantastic, or should we think even bigger? Should we think completely differently, as if we had a blank slate to start with? And should we say, instead of having it as a national park, for example, should we have climate change mitigation parks? Could we think that big, so that everything that we do on that national park, or whichever land you're looking at, it's all about nature-based solutions? Because nature-based solutions cover everything from humans enjoying themselves to preventing climate change, some of the devastating effects of climate change as well. It's just a question to kind of ask, and some of the students got some really interesting ideas about that. So really, to conclude, I don't think that when people say, how can the outdoor recreation be not detrimental to conservation? I will completely turn that around. And I'd leave you with this statement, is that without the outdoor recreation sector's engagement, the effects of climate change will be more damaging to UK society, and the country will not reach its emission reduction targets. So it's absolutely essential that the outdoor recreation sector gets involved with this, but it is already doing something, and without it, we are looking at a much bleaker future than we potentially are already. So, thank you very much.